5 years of Indian independence as Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav program across the country. And as a part of this Amrit Mahotsav, CSIR is celebrating Jigyasa Vigyan Mahotsav 2022. So it's a national level scientific creative competition, and which is meant to be create content like infographics, comics, science fiction, and videos, apps, animations. So this would also involve organizing this kind of series of boot camps, and wherein students have an opportunity to directly interact with the experts like you. And last week we have organized the thematic boot camps. So on the various topics such as energy, health, and artificial intelligence, climate change, and so on. So this week we are organizing this content creation boot camp, and that would provide our students to create creative scientific content in terms of comics, apps, and fiction, and so on. So as a part of this creation boot camp, CSIR NISPER has given this opportunity to organize this infographic boot camp. So it's a great opportunity for us and for the students, where students can understand the tips and tricks of infographics. So where they can directly contact with you, they can clear their doubts. And yes, before we start this very interesting session, I would request Dr. G. Mahesh, Senior Principal Scientist, CSIR NISPER, and Nodal Officer for this boot camp, to please give his welcome address. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shubda, and good afternoon, everyone who have joined us on Zoom platform and the YouTube channel of CSIR Jigyasa. By way of repeating what my colleague Ms. Shubda Kapil said, we have been having the series of boot camps. We had a few last week, and we had one on science fiction yesterday, and another on science comics the day before. So today we have infographics, and for the rest of the week we have boot camps on video making, science video making, on animation, and even app development. And as Shubda said, so this comes to you under the as a run-up to the National Scientific Creativity Competition under CSIR Jigyasa Vigyan Mahotsav. Now I understand that all of you are school students belonging to from different parts of the country, and I rarely get an opportunity to interact with school students, but I should say I'm very happy today to interact with all of you, and it makes me a bit nostalgic too. I gather that many of you here are from Kendriya Vidyalayas, and I was a student of Kendriya Vidyalaya myself back in the 1980s, and I recall we also used to have science exhibitions and science competitions, but of course, and they were limited to making models and maybe some working models and chart papers, as we used to call it, which is I guess the infographics that we talk about today, which our experts will be discussing and sharing their expertise with you. So I recall, when I was a student, so in model making, a couple of my classmates, they made a very interesting model. So this was the model of a township, and this township had little houses and streets and the street lamps, and they had landscaped it, with trees and all that. And these street lamps and houses had little LEDs. And these LEDs were connected to a small DC motor. And the DC motor was kind of, taped to a turbine, which they fabricated. And this turbine was placed under a running tap. And obviously, with with water falling on the turbine, the motor moves, and then little electricity is produced, and all those LEDs in those little houses and street lamps, they all light up. So this was a very simple concept. The power plant, mini Heidel, maybe we can call it, or micro Heidel for that matter. So, but this model went places, literally speaking. This model, so my classmates, both of them, they used to take it for different exhibitions held in different regions of the country, and they brought back prizes to the school. So when I recall that, I think we have come a very long way from that to the kind of things that are possible today. Of course, at that point in time, there was no app, obviously no app development or these kind of things. But today, and I'm sure that all of you here are very tech savvy, definitely much more tech savvy than I am. And I think this is an opportunity for all of you to put those tech skills to use, and also showcase your creative talents. So on our part, what we have done is we have brought to you some of the finest science communication experts in the country. Two of them whom we have with us today, Ms. Ipsa Jain and Dr. Disha Chavan, whom my colleague Shubda will introduce to you in greater detail. So I guess, this is a good opportunity for you to interact with them, ask them as many questions as you want, and use this learning opportunity. And we wish you all the best for the competitions, and enjoy science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And just you rightly said that we have a panel of an infographic expert. So they'll be speaking on infographics, which is a combination of content, visual, and knowledge. And you can also say this is a visual presentation of ideas and data and knowledge, and how you can present your creative thoughts, and very quickly and very clearly. Our expert will explain all the facets and will give you the tips and tricks of infographics. So we start the session. We have with us Ms. Ipsa Jain. She's a scientist turned illustrator. She makes visuals, inks, and books for different audiences. She works with scientists and institutions to share stories of science. She hopes that her work inspires curiosity in a young and young at heart life. So we welcome you, Ipsa Ji. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I can't see all the participants here, but I'm hoping there are a few who are interested in learning about infographics. So I'm happy to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me. Let's begin. All right. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So both Disha and I will be, talking about different aspects of infographics today. I'm going to just set you all up with just a basic understanding of what is an infographic and how does one think about it and approach it. You can ask me any question that you have. I will also be asking you questions, and since we are interacting, sort of via a digital wall, maybe you can respond in the chat, and Shubda here or Mahesh here will be able to tell me your responses. Right. So the first question is, what is an infographic? Is anyone here who is willing to sort of give it a shot? Shubda already sort of gave us a clue of what an infographic means. Does somebody want to articulate that here for me? Right. Anyone? Just give me a minute. I'm not able to move my cursor or see my cursor really. All right. Since I didn't get a response, infographic, if you just break up the word, It's information plus graphic. And now the next bigger question that I want to ask you all, which is where I'm hoping that you will really interact with me, is what does information mean to you? What is your idea of information? And if you were to think about any specific story or any specific subject, what is it that you would want to talk about? Oh, somebody did respond. Vandana says, graphic visual representations of information, data, or knowledge intended to present information quickly and clearly. They can improve cognition by utilizing graphics to enhance the human visual system's ability to see patterns and trends. Wow, I feel like Vandana should also be one of the people here taking the workshop. I couldn't have articulated this better. Now maybe Vandana or someone else would like to talk about like what do you think information is. There is also a graphic here on the side. Is the chat box visible on my screen, or you're only clearly seeing the slide? Can someone tell me? Do you see my chat box on the screen?
We can't see your chat box.
All right. Okay, that's perfect then. All right. So infographics are posters. Infographics can be posters, but they may or may not be posters. Like the infographic that I have put on my slide, it's from Scientific American, which is a print media magazine. So infographics may find their way in print media or in digital media. They might be on WhatsApp messages, on Twitter, on posters, on Instagram, or on blogs. So infographic is not necessarily defined by the space it occupies, but more so by its function. All right. So anyone wants to give it the question of what is information a shot? Anything? Like what constitutes information for you? Okay. So information in the largest context could be anything that can be communicated and or needs to be communicated, however you want to put that across. And what are the kind of stories you want to tell is ultimately dependent on you and your interests. For example, Somrata here might be more interested in talking about climate change. I might be more interested in talking about cell biology, and somebody else might be more interested in talking about ecology or artificial intelligence. So depending on who you are and what are your sort of subject interests, you can define what is it that you want to do with your own infographic. But in my mind, and this is by no means a comprehensive list, you could use infographic for one of the following functions. One is to illustrate large data or convey simplified concepts, compare and contrast different topics or subtopics, and or raise awareness. Also, somebody Vandana asked the question, how infographics play a role in which field. They can be used to communicate any kind of information, Vandana, and can be for any kind of audience. But what their role is, what I would try to list here is kind of what their role is. But again, the context of your context of what you are telling and to whom you are telling can change and shape their role. In fact, that was going to be my next question. Maybe people here want to come up with an example. Like, let's say if we wanted to illustrate large data, what are the kind of data that you think you would want to showcase to a wider audience? Or maybe you would, or you have seen an example of an infographic which illustrates large data to a wider audience. Anyone wants to throw an example at me? For any of these four ideas, either to population genomics, amazing example. Anyone else? And we're just going to wait because I'm hoping that you will interact if I wait for you, that I want groundwater surveys. Okay. Right. So, so let me give you the context of the current situation we are living in. We are all living in a pandemic. Now, just think about this pandemic and think what are the large data that are available based on this pandemic. Can you come up with examples for any? What is the awareness? What are the kind of things you want to tell the publics of different kinds? So what would you want to inform them about? What are the concepts that they would need to understand to be able to manage their situation in this pandemic? And what might they want to compare? If you can think of examples. Okay, so for the sake of time, let me just go ahead. So, for example, large data in this context could be maybe the number of patients that have been infected, number of patients that have recovered, the number of patients who lost their lives to COVID, number of people who got vaccinated, number of people who are unvaccinated. So all of these are large data sets which can be clustered either based on geographical location. Maybe we can talk about those people in context of India. I'm sitting in Bangalore. Maybe we can talk about that in the context of Karnataka, or maybe just the city Bangalore. And then say, for example, conveying simplified concepts. Let's say we need to explain how do vaccines work, or how does COVID spread. So these become simplified concepts that are necessary to sort of explain in these times. Raise awareness. So raise awareness is somewhere where you take into account social context of the people with whom you are trying to communicate, and there you would want to talk about how do they make tiny changes in their daily lives such that they can prevent either getting infected, or if they are infected, how should they change their habits such as they reduce the spread and have a better recovery. In a comparison, so maybe we want to compare different kinds of vaccines or different kinds of medicines, or maybe compare it with another epidemic that has happened previously, the current pandemic and the previous pandemic. So these are like just higher fundamental ideas as to what one might be able to do. And I'm just giving examples from the current pandemic because I'm hoping and assuming that all of us have at least some awareness of it. But same could be sort of extended to any field of interest that you may be pursuing. Right. So infographics have actually been around for a very long time. The first few infographics actually came in 17th century. The examples I have are from much later. And the first few examples that I have seen were about actually mapping stars, mapping astronomical bodies. So it's kind of, I will come to that aspect later. You can think of them as maps, or you can think of them as infographics, and the line is a little bit blurry. But here, the concrete examples of infographics that we have from history are of course from the Western culture. One is from one is from the US, and one is from Europe, and both are presented in Europe. So they are about people and population. So the first one talks about what was the percentage of African American people in urban and rural areas. So it uses line as a metaphor. So the whole line is the total population, and then it divides the percentage into different fractions of line. But the interesting thing that this visualizer has done is that it's just not a line, and the line has been made into an interesting form. So they took the creative liberty of taking that line and bending its shape just to also accentuate the difference between the green, yellow, and the red, and show you that the red portion of the line is a lot more compared to the other two small fractions. One could easily shrink that data and make a smaller straight line bar, which will fit along the paper. But by doing that, you diminish the comparison between the green and the yellow segment. So by extending this line and giving it a form to fit in and pack it into the paper, the author or the illustrator or the visualizer in this case was able to show what they wanted to show. They had a very specific intent of showing the ratio of white people and not white people. The infographic on the right talks about number of deaths across seasons due to different kinds of wounds during a particular war. And this particular graph, actually, there's an interesting story behind it, but I'm not going to go into that for the sake of time, where this graph, which is now called the Rose plot, led to a nurse called Florence Nightingale getting money for an experiment that she wanted to do, which is why we have sanitation in hospitals and surroundings today. All right. So we talked just a little briefly about what is information. Not a lot of you gave me answers, but information, the idea is that it is a set of meaningful facts, and meaningful facts kind of being an important aspect here. And when they come together, they can inform higher order thinking or build new knowledge. Just give me a second. I have to stop sharing for a minute. Right. So I have a form which I was hoping that the attendants of this workshop can fill. I am writing that in the chat here. Maybe it can also be shared on YouTube channel if possible. Right. Can someone please take care of that? Can you have people fill the form? Right. So, how information is represented, particularly on an infographic and even elsewhere, there are three components that we will try to deconstruct today. So if you look at the infographic, let's just take some time and look at the infographic that I have here on right. And the size is not a lot, so you can't really read all the details, and that's not necessarily important. And maybe that's why I also kind of kept it like that, so that we pay attention to composition of it and not so much to the science that it is trying to tell. So what you see here is, just give me a second again. Okay, I can't minimize this window where I see myself. So you see a title, some brief text, then you have an image, and the image also has like a magnified version which has some more visual notations. You have some arrows, you have some descriptions, and then you have kind of a list of planets. And in that list, you again have a title, a small description of what those planets are. And so you get that list. And in that list also, there are multiple columns. You have the text column, you have an image column, you have actually multiple image columns. And in the first image column, what they have done is they have juxtaposed two things together: how the astronomical body looks on the outside and how it looks on the inside. And then there is a notation for the magnetic field of this particular planet. So it defines the North and South Pole. And again, the science in itself is not so important. And then there is an index, which is the colored boxes, which tell you that, this astronomical body has this kind of layers on that, their structure. Now, so if we were to categorize all of these ideas into three things, that would come to be data, text, and images. Now, and I say data here as analyzed data, and I'll come to that a little later. So, so here in the, let's look at the table that's at the bottom. There are two kinds of data that you are getting. you are getting information of how what is the composition of the layers of I don't know, like the crust and so on, like what is in the core, what is in the mantle, and what is in the crust of these astronomical bodies. So there is a listicle data, and because the thickness and thinness of those things is also kind of proportional to what it is in reality. So it also gives you a sense of proportions of these features. Maybe this percent is gaseous, this percent is gaseous, and this person is whatever made of something else. And then it also gives you another information, which is about the magnetic field, which, okay, by the way, this infographic is from Scientific American. I think they make the best infographics out there, right? So before we move ahead, let's go to analyze data, like collect some data of our own. So I've shared a simple Google form. Maybe we can just take a minute or two to fill that in, share that in chat here. I'm hoping that it gets shared with you elsewhere as well. Right.
Ipsa, if this is for the attendance, because we are...
no, this is not for attendance. This is for an activity that we will do during the session.
Fine. I will share this on YouTube also.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are just collecting data that we will try and sort of make meaning from later. A question on YouTube: poster infographic should not be open to multiple interpretations. Will an infographic with definition, advantage, disadvantages, types, and history be accepted? It could be an infographic if you have arranged it in a kind of layout that makes it easier to read. If it's text only, from this question, it seems like you're talking about a text only infographic. So even that set of information is fine to put in an infographic. Like, my only question is that who is the audience and what is your intent? If your intent matches with the needs of the audience, then this could very well be an infographic. So infographic basically has to be clear and lucid, like somebody mentioned on the chat conversation we are having, and it has to have a visual setup. And when I say visual setup, it doesn't mean that it has to have a visual element like a symbol or an image or something like that, or a photograph. And that's not the essential requirement. It's the organization of information in a particular arrangement that makes it visually sort of lucid and quick to grasp, such that I can take it in quickly and understand and interpret what it means. Yeah, that should work. All right, and let me just go and check how many people have filled the form. If sufficient people have filled the form, then I can just move ahead. Even if I have like some 20 responses, I think we'll be able to do the activity that we want to do. Oh, I have only 4 responses. Can maybe some more people fill in the form quickly? Maybe people on this meeting itself can fill the form, and that will help. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. Infographic can be a 2-page infographic, but try to think of it as much as possible in 1 page, in the sense, because infographic is meant to be a smaller packet of information. And if you need 2 pages, it means that you have not completely thought through as to what exactly you want to tell. I mean, this is a rule for anything you do, and particularly for infographic, is edit. Like whatever you may think about whether your audience really needs it, and how much information do you really need to pack. And even when we think of an infographic in 2 pages, we tend to think in terms of spreads. Let me just show you one I have here. So for example, now this is a spread where you have 2 pages put together, making one whole composition. And in that sense, it becomes, a 2-page infographic, but it doesn't necessarily have to be 2 pages that you don't see together, because then the image text relationship that you are trying to develop kind of goes away. While we deconstruct images and text further on in the presentation, maybe we'll try to sort of also see if we can, understand how the image and text relationship is relevant to understanding the infographic. So if you have your, for example, legend on one page and your diagram on the other, then I have to turn back and look what that diagram really means. How can you generate the graphics? Generation of graphics can be using multiple sources. It depends on what is the information. If you are, you can use open access libraries for icons. You can draw your own icons. You can collect pictures from open source medias, maybe like Wikimedia or something like that. And if it's data that you are interpreting, then you will need a data analysis software depending on how big is your data. If you have simple data, then maybe you can work with something like Excel, or maybe even just the simple data charts that are available on PowerPoint or something like that. And I'm sure there are web tools also which allow you to analyze data. But if you're working with large data, let's say population with respect to how many people got infected and how many people recovered from COVID. So those are really large numbers, and you might want to work with more complicated, sophisticated data analysis tools to generate those kind of images. So it really depends on what kind of graphics you need to generate. Right. So I'll just, give me a minute. Okay, I still don't have enough responses, so maybe the coordinators can keep on putting in the chat the link. But I'm going to go ahead for the value of time. Right. Right. So we have sort of now figured out, what data might look like a little bit. We filled in a survey ourselves, and you can also get your information from scientific literature or any kind of database. There are databases, for example, for which records COVID data. There is, meteorological department data that tells you temperature each day in the morning and the night. Maybe that's your large data, and you want to study the patterns of temperature across cities or something. So you need to have a source of data if you're looking for large data, and if you're not looking for large data and looking for smaller information, so in that case, you can do either, primary research where you go to the ground yourself and collect data, which is kind of like the survey you filled. And so that will become primary data. Or you can do secondary data where you already look at existing reports, like maybe it's in newspaper, maybe it's somewhere online, maybe it's somewhere in different reference books, where you try to find information about the subject of your interest to gather data that you want. It may or may not be numerical, right? Right. So coming to the, again, how analyzed data might look like. So these are, again, like some of the higher broad categories of how the data might look like, and it will change and take shape according to your, context, and it may again not be a very comprehensive list. So the obvious, here are some of the obvious examples. For example, a timeline. A timeline could be, let's say, progress. So, scientific progress India has made since independence, and what are the landmarks. So, in this last 75 years, and so that becomes a timeline. Now, let's say number of units or percentage or distribution of variety. Let's say how many people in India have received higher science education So that kind of becomes percentages, and that's another kind of data that you could think about. And since we already talked about comparison and contrast, so maybe we want to compare how people in rural settings are masking up versus people in urban settings are masking up. So that becomes another kind of data. So maybe the measures you take in semi-urban and rural settings are different from the measures you take in urban settings to sort of, inform the public that you need to mask up. Then there is a space-time relationship, which could include like galaxies and even local maps as to how, for example, how has the forest cover of India changed with time. And then cyclic relationships, so which could include things like life cycle of an organism, or a crop cycle, annual crop cycle. So then object and composition, so which could be about, let's say, what is a car made of? So you have a view of different components. So it's kind of like a labeled diagram essentially. Then a flow of instruction or a flow of process, or a flow of information chart, which could look like a flow chart or something like that. So these are again different kind of visualizations that one could have, of data. And also, even if you have a larger problem, like for example, I would just give the context of the pandemic. In the same context, there are several questions that you can ask, and depending on what is the question you are asking, you might need a different kind of data that you want to show. And come back towards the end to how we put together data and how we ask a question kind of defines our intent and what we end up doing with the infographic that we have created. But ultimately, all of this data, like if you look at the right side, like it becomes visual in nature. It's coming from, a table of numbers, and we don't put that table of numbers because nobody has the time to read and understand those numbers and where they're coming from. But once you put together it in a graph or a visual format, then it starts to become intuitive and easier for the, audience to take it in. Right. So there are 2 chat questions. Can someone read it out for me? Because every time I open chat, it becomes difficult for me to move to the next slide. Can you please read?
Yeah, Dr. Repsa, one question is, ma'am, is there any apps or tools for making infographics?
Yes. So one of the best recommendation I have is Canva. It's an online free tool, and it already has a lot of templates for one to make an infographic. Last year, when we were working as a group called Inside COVID to create some infographics for public health, that's the platform we used for a lot of our work. It has templates. It already has a set of icons. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about icons. And, you might not have to build a lot yourself, but you still need to know what's the information you want to share and what's the amount of information you want to share and why you want to share. Yeah. I personally think if you know how to use Google Slides or PowerPoint or something like that, even that's a great place to make infographics. Again, like a lot of people think, I mean, maybe not school students, but a lot of other students that I interact with think that you need some high funda tool for being able to make good infographic, and that's not important. What is more important is your idea. I think Disha will also make you do an activity later where you get to explore this yourself. Yeah. All right. So we just briefly covered like what the data might look like. So we talked about how data, text, and images are the 3 components that come together to make an infographic. I see that there is more chat. Maybe I'll address those questions just a little bit later. Let me finish just this part, the image part, before I move to text. I'll respond to your queries. Right. What are images and what can they look like, especially in the context of an infographic? We just saw that even analyzed data that's been put together starts to look like an image in itself. It has a visual nature to it. And the other thing that we use are signs. Now, signs could be icons or symbols. Like, for example, here in this, you see 3 kinds of things. it's an expanded view from the same infographic that I was showing you earlier. So you see these semicircles that are representing different parts or different layers of the core, crust, and mantle, and so on of Earth or the Moon. So that is one kind of visualization where a color is representing a certain kind of composition. And we have devised a symbol. It does not look like that, but here I'm saying that this brown line means something like this, and I have given a key on the side that says key brown means this, orange means this. So it's a devised relationship that I'm building for being able to explain what I'm doing here. I mean, I say I, but whoever has made it has used this trick. Now, but then there is another kind of symbol here, which is a south-north pole reflection of a magnet. Now, this is not something that the person who made this infographic came up with. Now, this is something that we use routinely in science, and people who have studied a certain level of physics education, had certain level of physics education, are more likely to understand that what this represents. So even without necessarily saying that this is a representation of a magnet, and if I have in my text somewhere mentioned that we are talking about magnetic field, the relationship is easy to make that, yeah, this is the magnetic field that I'm seeing. So it's a learned sort of sign association. And we'll explore that a little more, because ultimately in infographics that we will end up generating, we probably will not work with large data, but more smaller data. In those cases, particularly such kind of learned symbols are very useful. So we all understand certain symbols and associate, like say plus with health, or and so on. And then representative images. So representative images are images where things look like what they would normally look like, which could even be a photograph or a drawing. For example, the left half of the Earth or the Moon here, that becomes the representative image because it's taken from a photograph, or like it's a captured photograph which has been used to represent these objects here. So even though I have removed that label right now here, that this is the Moon and this is the Earth, just because of our experience and understanding of the subject, we can actually say, yeah, this is Moon and this is Earth. If I call it Jupiter, then you might fight with me that, oh, yeah, this is not Jupiter. Right. So coming with symbols. So these are some emoticons from the emoticon library. So let's say if I were to use these set of symbols, what do you see here? Can like what are the different categories that I'm talking about? Can people tell me about it? And then these, and the next slide is meant to be interactive. So I'm hoping that you will come back with your interaction horses.
Yes, one answer is there on YouTube. Rekha Rani said it represents particular emotions.
All right. So, okay, emotion is one way to interpret it. All right. So let me interpret it differently. Let me say human, death, alien, animal, or let me say, what else can I say? Right. So here we, somebody who probably uses emojis more than I do, interpreted that as the emotions that they have, already ascribed a meaning to. There is an association that they have with this emoticon, this symbol, and I had a different interpretation of it, and that can happen I mean, largely the interpretation that the YouTuber gave is most likely correct. But here I was going for the idea of contrast, and that is not necessarily maybe explicit by just the visuals here, but maybe I would need to give a little more textual context to make that apparent that I'm comparing these four different ideas. Let's look at another symbol set. It's clearly stolen from somewhere. Let's talk about the third on the top row. What does it signify for you? Anyone? Is there an answer?
Somebody's saying experiments, polio camp, science.
Okay. So what is the object? What's the object? The whole set is called a laboratory set. Any other answers?
On YouTube, someone says that the emojis are related to the labs.
Yeah. No, I'm asking about that one specific emoji, which is the third one in the top row.
Somebody's saying dropper.
Yeah. So this is a dropper. And so now this it's not a picture of a dropper, but it has a resemblance to the form of a dropper, which allows us to interpret that this is a dropper we are talking about. So if I were to just use this icon for a dropper in any context, it'll be easy for anyone to understand. So now, so the comparison here is that emoticons have contextual meaning, whereas icons can have contextual meanings, but they have a very direct visual congruence with the sub-object that they are trying to define and describe. So I can say, oh, this is the heater, this is the battery, this is the beaker, this is the test tube rack, this is the scientist or the student doing the experiment, and so on. So depending on what you are trying to describe, you can, again, we saw here that we used a colored line to describe what's the composition of this astronomical body. You can either similarly devise icons and symbols, and based on the context that you're giving them, you can give them new meaning or use the meanings that are already associated with them, right? The representative images are fairly clear, so I'm not going to really talk about that a lot. But before I go into text, let me take some more questions. I see that there are quite a few questions. Should I maybe, do this? Right. Okay. Mentions shape and size for infographic. It depends on the end use. For example, if you are, let's say, sharing it on WhatsApp, then maybe you want use a size that is appropriate for WhatsApp, such that when WhatsApp sends you a window of image, your complete information is in that window without having to open it, or your most important information is in that window. When you click it, it opens more. If your infographic is going to be in a book, then you can decide whether it's going to be on something that runs on both the pages, what's the size of this book, or it's going to be something that runs only on one page or half a page. So there is no defined size that's ideal for it. What you need to consider is where will you put it. All right. Thank you. Right. So now, what does the text do on the infographic? So there are titles, there is some main body, and there might be more smaller titles, and there's smaller descriptions. And the other important things are, of course, labels and legends. So labels and legends are two different things. Does someone understand the difference between labels and legends? I'm not expecting, I'm just wondering. Okay, never mind. So labels are when you point an arrow to something, or not really an arrow, a line to something, and say this is Earth or this is Moon, and that becomes the label. The legend in this case means kind of like the key. Okay, here I'm using this symbol or this color or this kind of line to signify this, and so that kind of becomes the legend in question. And the idea for, just a minute. Yeah, so the idea for writing text on infographic is that don't write in text exactly what you are showing on your image with your data, but rather write what somebody might need to understand what you are showing in your image or your data. The moment you develop a redundancy, your infographic becomes boring or heavy. And so the rule is, I mean, like rule as in no rule, but like the rules I follow is that once I write something, I try to see if it's doing the job of working with my image content well or not. If it's not, then I edit the text to come to the simplest description I need for my audience to understand what I'm showing. And what happens is, like, we'll come to the process also just a little in just a little while, is that when we do research, we get as students of science, we get really overwhelmed by research. We feel like there's so much that we've learned and we need to tell everything to our audience. And that's something that you should clearly really avoid. Define a boundary and a structure for yourself, that this is what I need to tell, this is what I need to tell. And I would even go so far ahead to recommend that define the size of your infographic before you start working on it, because then that limits that this is how much I am going to write. If I want to show this image, I have only this much space to write in. Like if I have a notebook page that looks like this, I can't write 2,000 words. I can't write, maybe even I need to maybe write maybe maximum 700 words for this whole page. So define your limits so that you contain the amount of, so you figure out what's the relationship that size should have to the amount of information that you're giving. Make that a practice. All right. Any more questions right now? Okay, I'll come to this actually first. Right. So what happens in an infographic? So in an infographic, in an ideal scenario, any new piece of communication you make, it should have base of an existing information. There should be something on your piece that the audience feels more comfortable with, like I know at least something about this. If everything looks like something they will not understand, or reads like something they will not understand, they will not invest the time on it. So make sure that there is some ground or some basis for them to feel familiar with it. And then you add layers of new information that you want to tell them. And those new information can either be in the data, image, or the text part of it. And depending again what you want to do and what your ideas are, you can decide if you want to explicitly give them the conclusion. Like somebody asked the question, like, can I write definition, advantage, disadvantage, and all of that. So that means you already know what you want to tell them, and you want to tell them literally that. But in some cases, especially if you're working with a data-driven idea, you might want to share the data and allow your audience to make their own interpretations. You may want to give them the space to make their own observations and make their own inferences from it. But it ultimately depends on the intent of your work and the need of your audience. So for example, if the intent of your work is to illustrate or raise awareness, then you might want to tell them directly that once you come back home from outside, wash your hands, wash your face, fold your mask neatly and keep it somewhere, or wash it, whatever it is that you want to tell them. And but like if you want to tell them, but if you want to illustrate data, you might just want to show them that masked people number of people who use mask properly contracted only this much contract infection, whereas people who don't mask up this much contract infection. So then the audience gets to decide in which part they want to be. But in raising awareness, you're telling them that wear the mask. So that's the difference that, in like the subtle difference in your intent, and neither of them is wrong. You have to define what is the intent of your work, and it should just ideally match with the need of your audience, and that should work. Okay. I'm just going to take questions before I move to next. Manish asks if we have large data and text, can we make big infographics? Yeah, like infographics can be as big as a wall. So there's a particular artist whose work I really like. She's called Georgia Luby, and she has made infographics that are like painted like murals on walls. So there is no like how to say, there is no limit like that, but you have to figure out like how much time your audience will spend on looking at the data. Her work lies in a museum where you look at that piece of data, like that infographic, like you would look at a piece of art. You spend a lot of time with it and you look at details. But if you are say raising awareness, now raising awareness is not something you can do on that kind of setting. You might want to do something which is quicker and like short bites. So I think big is possible, but again depends on what's the intent of your work. What do you want to do with it? Yeah. Okay, somebody did. All right. Right. All right. So we now come to this part of the infographic. All of these might look like big words. Don't get bothered by that. The definitions and these words are not necessarily, very important. Now, just stay with me. So there are two axes that we are defining here. One is conceptual and data driven. So conceptual means where ideas are more important. You're not driven by data, but you're driven by how things might work, what they may be. And data driven is when you actually have formidable data, quantitative data to work with. And the other is where you are figuring out what is the meaning of these ideas, what is the meaning of this data. And the other axis is where you know what you want to say in very firm voice, and you want to show this particular trend. In exploratory, you might be figuring out what different relationships might look like, what the data, how differently the data can be interpreted, and what it might mean. So in that axis, so ultimately you get like four kind of ideas. So one which is very confirmatory, like like something which screams, let's say wear mask, wear mask, wear mask. So that's very declarative. It's data driven, and it has that emphasis of information. In the left top quadrant, it's more learning and instructive. So you might want to talk about, like, let's say, for example, how to wear a mask, how to wash a mask. So that becomes, it's more about the idea. It's not so much driven about the data. Then a conceptual exploratory, which we may or may not necessarily use in science communication. It's mostly going to be used in brainstorming and those kind of activities. So that's something you can ignore. But as a personal practice, you may want to try this, where you are just trying to figure out how different things relate to each other. What are the different ideas that come up? Let's say in the discussion today, maybe you want to note down things that I said, and Disha tells you, and you figure out how they relate with each other. And then something which is more like it's based on data, but it's not commanded by a defined outcome. And then you're just like looking for patterns there, and that becomes like the trend analysis and so on. So these are like we spoke about, like four different roles that infographics might have. And I think this is another way of looking at what roles infographic might have. So like the question that came up about definition and advantage or disadvantage. So that would lie somewhere in that declarative zone where you're just giving information with a very specific then direct intent, and there's no room for the audience to necessarily interpret their own meaning if they want to. And like somebody did mention somewhere that infographic needs to have a specific outcome, but the way you put it together, you don't necessarily always have to say what your bottom line is. You can give them enough material and context to figure out their own bottom line. And it's always good to place trust in your audience and let them also figure out what they want to figure out, rather than always just like hitting the nail on the head. It kind of, at least I personally think that kind of helps building trust with your audience, because you're trusting their intelligence, you're trusting that they can make their own choices and they can make their own decisions. All right, so I'm just kind of done with the conceptual part of how I think of infographics. And I mean, anybody else who talks to you will probably talk about it differently and think about it differently. Now, let's talk about the process of making an infographic. So before I share what I would do, let me stop sharing just for a bit. Maybe there are people who want to talk about how they would approach their infographics. Let me just also take a break for a sip of water. I'm listening to you. Just, yeah. Yeah. Anyone wants to, I mean, it's probably a long answer to arrive for, but just any keywords that you might want to share about how would you go about making an infographic? Somebody asked a question, can we use different colors and designs in our infographics? Yes, exactly. That's the idea. But it has to be meaningful, like it has to be thought out. Just like, don't just add color because you think color will make it interesting. There should be a meaning to why you are using color, because in an infographic, color can also be like a symbol, like we saw in the earth crust thing, that a brown line meant something, a green box meant something, and so on. Right. By collecting data, so collecting data and using our own knowledge and imagination. I'm not sure if there's a lot of room of imagination in terms of representing like information, but yeah, there is room for imagination in how you visually put it together. But yes, collecting data is a very, very important point, and your existing knowledge is always going to be part of the work you do. It's, I mean, you can't exclude it from becoming part of everything that you do. I mean, there's no good pattern or a bad pattern. I'll come to my own process that I might follow. Yes, you can collect data from Google. Yeah, I've already answered Manish's question about large data and big infographics. All right. Can we create infographics without data? Yeah, you may not need numerical data, so to speak, but you at least need some information. Let's say, for example, you want to talk about good practices during COVID if you have to go outside. So there you don't need data in terms of numbers, but you do need reliable data. Maybe you want to look at WHO guidelines or ICMR guidelines. So that becomes your data. So it's not numbers, it's not graphs, but it's still data that's been given by experts or people who are reliable. I am not sure I understand your question, Vivek. It shouldn't be the other way around. You should first look at the data and then make your infographic, and not go the other way where you make your infographic and then look for data. That's a very biased way of working. Can we add our own theory in infographic? So it depends on, your intent of the infographic. It's something that you are writing in a research proposal or your thesis, or you are presenting a hypothesis and you are using infographic as a medium. Then, yeah, you can add your own hypothesis or your own theory to it. But if you are doing it as with a sensibility of science communication, I mean, it has to be contextual, but I would like advise you to be strongly sort of vigilant about what you are doing there, and maybe you want to think about the ethics of what you are saying. Infographics to look for an idea. Maybe you can go to Pinterest or maybe just Google search for infographics from Scientific American, and that becomes a source of inspiration for you. How can we make out of the box infographic as listed by CSIR? So CSIR has to tell me what is this list that Shaurya is talking about. I'm not clear. Mahesh or Shubhda, can you help me understand what is this box infographic that Shaurya is asking about?
Maybe Somdata can. I'm also not very sure about what box infographic is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay. Maybe no one really understands this question. Sorry, I'm sorry, we don't understand the question. Maybe I can write more elaborate question, and maybe that might be helpful. Samiksha asks, is it about a river project? Again, I do not have the context to answer this, but you could very much make an infographic about life of any river or river in general, and that is a cool infographic to work on as well. Do we have to show both sides of coin or only those which are helpful to us? Ansh asked this question. Ansh, again, it depends on your intent, on the need of your audience. Like that's something that you have to really define and be clear on before you start to make any science communication piece, whether it's a comics or it's it's an infographic, it's a poster, or whatever it is that you choose to use. That kind of intent really just has to be clear before you start working. And if a comparison and contrast, which becomes both sides of coins here, is something that will make it useful for your audience or maybe help them grasp the concept that you want to understand better, then sure, go for it. If not, then you have to ask yourself, why do you want to give your limited real estate space, like your page or your digital file? It's all like a real estate, and you have to give it, you have to define that here I'm going to put this, here I'm going to put this, and here I'm going to put this. And you have to always ask yourself, does it deserve that space? Can it go away? Or do I need to add something to make it complete? So those questions, asking those questions might help you understand this better. Okay. What's the difference between poster and infographic? It again depends on what the poster is. Like infographic could also become a poster, but a poster, let's say for, I'm not sure if you are aware of those kinds of examples, but let's say when I think in the 90s, India was still struggling with polio, and there used to be a campaign like Do Boond Zindagi Ki. And so there were a lot of posters around with some image and some text, and that was not necessarily an infographic because there was no absolute information given, but it was like a poster which told the publics that, hey, you can just take this oral vaccine and it helps us combat this polio, which is a problematic disease. So that kind of becomes poster. So poster could have larger meaning than an infographic, and it's more meant as a like gathering intention, maybe telling information about an event or telling information about a process without necessarily having like knowledge making as a part of its process. Information like infographics certainly has knowledge making as a part of its process. Posters may or may not have that. Yeah. I've answered Anshu's question also. All right. Okay, I'm gonna now start sharing my screen again. Just give me a second. So nobody really came back to me with the process, and it's okay. I understand it's kind of a really complicated thing to sort of share. So I have written here find information, but I think I should have written find idea. So you have to first find what's the theme, what's the big picture, what's the idea that you really want to communicate. And then you have to find your audience. Again, who do you want to communicate to is really, really important. Let's say, for example, if you are talking about agriculture with farmers, maybe they already understand a lot about crops that you don't necessarily need to write on the poster. But if you are talking about agriculture with somebody like me who does not necessarily practice agriculture, then I might need a lot more context if you're telling me about a certain kind of, pest resistant plant or a certain kind of fertilizer. So, so understanding who your primary audience is really, really important. And then find the medium. And by finding the medium, I mean, you have to figure out whether you're going to print it or whether you're going to make a poster out of it or you're going to present it somewhere else or, like in an exhibition or in the CSIR competition. And and why that becomes important is because like you get to define that this is the real estate I have. I have an A3 size paper, or I have a mobile screen as my size, So once you define that page size, it also kind of also becomes relevant for you to start decluttering the information that you have, right? And then you will do more research, and that research again, like I said, could be primary research, could be secondary research, and could involve just like looking up references and whatever it is that is your process in this case. And then you will also do ideation again, where you will figure out, now this is the larger idea that I had, this is the audience I have, and since this is my audience from this larger picture, this is what they will benefit the most from. So let's say if I'm talking about, sustainability and for like in agriculture. So maybe you are presenting your information to, let's say, the farming community. So maybe you want to do a comparison between, non-sustainable fertilizers and more sustainable form of fertilizers, whatever that may be. And so then that becomes your idea, that I'm going to compare and contrast sustainable and non-sustainable methods, or and in that case, now, depending on the education level of the farming community you are reaching out to, you may want to write things explicitly, or you may want to show them graphs. Now, again, let's see for things like graphs, if the level of education has not been good, then interpreting from graph may or may not be intuitive. If it's a simple graph, which is a very simple direct line trend chart, then most people will be able to appreciate whether or not they have had good, access to good education. But if you're using a complex chart, a complex visualization, that will definitely not work for that audience. So that kind of figuring out you have to do at this point of time, and then start laying it out on paper. And I think Disha has an exercise plan for you. And so where you basically divide your paper into different segments, different boxes, and say that this box will present the larger picture idea. This box will present an image that relates with this larger picture idea. This box will show this smaller part that I'm more interested in or is more relevant to my audience. So that kind of term is not important, but you basically start putting it together on a piece of paper, which can be the size of your mobile screen or an easy chart or whatever it is that you are using. And then once you have figured that out, you start putting things together. And this is a process that will need iterations. You might realize that your image is too big or your image is too small. You might realize that your text is too large and does not fit in the box that you created for it. So then it will require some edits and iterations. And once you are ready with it, then you share it. And even in sharing, I would recommend two-layered sharing. Share first maybe with your family or your friends and ask them for their feedback. Do they understand what you are trying to say? Is there something else that you could have done which you can change and incorporate into this infographic? And once you have some good responses, then it's ready to be shared wherever it is that you initially thought you will, whether you print it or you'll share it online or digitally. And then you just essentially start sharing it. And hopefully you've made the world, better than it was to begin with. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to start sharing just an infographic. I have some responses here. Okay. Very interesting. So let me just see if I can copy some of the data that I have gotten from this onto my presentation. You're still seeing my presentation, right? If you don't see it at any point, just let me know. Right. So one of the questions I asked you was, do you like science? Mm-hmm. Right. So here I've just put together some data that responses I got from you all. And now, let's call it people and their belief. And people here in this context means the people who are part of this, meeting, this seminar, or whatever you want to call it. And let's say, this is a hypothesis, data-driven this thing, right? So it's here. So here I will write some description on why I ask these questions and how I ask these questions. So I can write this here, how I ask this question, or I can write that here as a smaller text. I'm sorry, I can't really reach. Maybe I can. Yeah. So here I can say ki I floated a survey among the attendees and got 14 responses. So we know that this data is from a primary research and that it's based on only 14 responses. So whoever is looking at it has clear information that it's coming from 14 people, not 1400 people. Obviously, data from say 1400 people is going to be far more reliable than data from 14 people. Right. So now, let's say then based on this, so I had, okay, let me just for a minute share full screen. Now, I've just written the broad themes, but I'm just showing you how I will organize this information. Now, what I have done here, cheekily, is that I have put, do you like science and do you believe in any God? Because faith and science are often thought to be in competition or in contrast of each other. And here we are, a lot of us are scientists or students of science, and we are participating in a Jigyasa Mahotsav, which is being organized by CSIR. So here I ask the question whether, people who like science also believe in God or not. And actually an overwhelming majority does, right? So from here, we can start understanding that in this group of people, while people like science and maybe trust in science, but they also have faith in whatever faith they practice, right? And so here, what I could now do is I could either write this commentary that I just shared with you in the infographic, or let people make their own observations. Then I have also added here, do you believe that infographics are useful? And so now people have said yes and maybe, which let's say overwhelmingly means that mostly people think that it's useful, forgetting the fact that it's a very small sample size. But let's see, can I now, based on this, make a statement that everybody who likes science is also most likely to be, like infographics or think infographics are useful. So this is where your responsibility comes as a student of science, is you also have to check how you're putting information together. Are you putting information together in a biased way? Let's say if I had an agenda that I wanted to say that infographics are very useful just because I know how to make them, and I wanted to say that everybody who does science should also know how to do infographics or like infographics. So then I can put these data together and maybe force you to think in a direction that's not necessarily have any correlation. So when you are the person who has this, responsibility, power of making an infographic, always consider your choices and be aware of where your biases are and why you have the intent that you have, right? All right. So I'm just going to take some more questions here. And what does biased data mean, right? Like this example I just gave, right? Like if, let's say I wanted to say, I wanted to deny climate change, for example, then there are a small subsection of papers and scientists who don't believe in climate change, and they have peer-reviewed literature that talks about talks about that aspect of like their beliefs and their understanding of how climate change is actually not happening. So I might just choose to pick data from their studies and present those only, even though they might be 5% of the total of climate change science data. And so that becomes biased data. So if you're coming with a very strong agenda of your own, which is which may have implications on people's behavior. So even say, for example, mask up, like you could even say that that's an agenda and like maybe we are forcing. So that's why you have to be aware why you are making these choices. So you have to know your sources. So if WHO is saying, or some other relevant health organizations are saying that mask up, then yeah, you are justified in presenting that kind of data. And so it depends. Like it's a very gray area, but and there's no right or wrong that I can tell you right now. It's a lot to do with beliefs, but you always question yourself why you are presenting the data you are presenting in the way you are presenting it, why you have picked a particular source as a source of your information, and why you are ignoring something else. And it's basically like for you to consider. Your audience will also consider whether they want to believe you or not believe you. And it is always useful to cite your sources at the bottom. Just like I wrote in my infographic that this was I floated a survey during the session, and these are responses from 14 people. So I'm being transparent about my method and my research or my analysis. So the moment you exhibit transparency on your sources and your research and method, the likelihood that people who are reading your material will trust you all becomes higher. All right. I'm not sure if I have enough time to go into design process, but I'll just briefly touch upon it. Right. So in the order of information that you organize on your infographic, there has to be a sense of order or hierarchy. And hierarchy is not to say that one information is important than more important the other, but it's just that one information will be used, the order of information. Like if you have this information, then the next becomes easier to understand. And if you have these two information, the next one becomes easier to understand. So that becomes the order of information. And what you can do is use graphic design tools to start figuring out that on your real estate of your paper or your screen, what kind of shape, size of text, of image you want to put together, and what is the feeling you want to give. And that sort of starts defining helps you understand that this is the piece of information I want people to look at first. So this is probably something that I need in bigger font size or in a louder color or something like that. And this is the information that I don't want people to look at. Like you saw when I was trying to do this, I reduced the size of my method. So that's not the most important thing according to me here. Maybe you think as a maker that that's important and that's something you want to be, sort of putting it together in a larger font size. So, but I reduced the size. I had to reduce the image of the sizes here. I mean, this is of course an incomplete infographic, but I had to reduce the image of sizes of image here because I wanted to fit 3 images in one real estate that I had at this time. So, so all of these, availability of real estate and hierarchy of information, are the 2 important considerations that you need to give once you start figuring out how do you place things on grid. And if you have to make sacrifices, let's say your text somewhere has become too much, so maybe you can either edit the text and reduce it, but maybe the text is really important. Then you can figure out if reducing the image size of the image does not take away the clarity of the image, but allows your text now to be still sitting on that real estate you have. So these are kind of choices that you will always have to shuffle with and figure out through a trial and error process to finally make the infographic you want to make. All right, I will not go further into technicals and answer questions now. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Anushka asks, is it necessary for infographics to be in form of statistical representation, or can it be in form of text and pictures? It can be in form of text and pictures. Like we were discussing how, let's say if we want to tell people to mask up and we want to just talk about that, or good practices during COVID. So that would totally be something which does not have data, but is more instructional and rich in iconography and text kind of infographics. So not all of them need to have data to be called infographic. Any kind of information that you gather from a credible source becomes data. I don't mean data necessarily only in sense of numerical data that has been analyzed. Yeah. Can more graphics help us to understand easy? I am always wary of the word more. I think it should be an optimal balance. Both image and text need to be there to give us a complete information and to give clarity to audience. By just adding more visuals for the sake of adding more visuals doesn't help, is what I think. There's no blanket rule. It might depend on the context. For example, if you're making an infographic for 5 young kids, maybe you want to add some decorative elements just to, sort of catch their attention and retain their attention. what kind of data? So data again, so Muskan asks, can you tell more about how can we raise awareness through infographics? What kind of data do we have to provide in the infographics? So again, it depends on what you want to do, Muskan. And again, like I said, numerical data is not necessarily required, but you need information from credible sources like, let's say, washing your hands or wearing a mask, not going outside as much as possible, eating home cooked food, taking a walk, and whatever it is, like say for healthy living at the present time, right? Right. So Tarun asks, there are some topics in science which are controversial, like rap drive, where few people accept it and some don't. In this situation, how can you make infographic out of it? So Tarun, I think it will also depend on your intention, or what is it that you want to do? Do you want to convince the people who don't believe in that to believe it, or do you want to share it more with just people and decide whether they want to believe it or not believe it? And depending on that context, you can decide how your infographic should look like. You can certainly make an infographic. See, if you make an infographic, it's not a guarantee that your audience is accepting it. The audience always will have a choice, right? So audience is empowered with a choice, so you can still make your infographic and put it out there. But how it is received can depend on their context, and how you want to present depends on your intent. Can we divide a page in 5 or more? I mean, again, in terms of grid, you can again always divide your grid into any number of sections that you may want to do it. But again, like I said, the real estate on any kind of screen or page is limited, and you always have to ask questions. Why do you need to divide it? Why do you need this information that you are giving? Does your audience really need it? Does your intent really justify that division, or are you just giving that information because you know it? Yeah. Is there a standard or maximum number of data points that an infographic may cover? No, like again, this is not something that there's a rule for. It again depends on what you want to do and what your audience needs. Can you tell a bit again about the design of infographic? So I don't want to take that away from Disha, because I think Disha is going to be covering some aspects of it. So just hold on for hold on a little bit, and I think you'll get more answers on that. So Udita asked the question: should we dump down the information we give? I don't think dumbing down anything is the answer. Dumbing down is not simplification. Dumbing down means you are assuming that your audience is somebody who does not understand anything, and they can't make their own choices. That's definitely not the way to treat your audience. You should treat your audience with respect. You can simplify it for them. You can remove jargons. You can remove technical details, and you can remove nuances that might not necessarily be important or relevant for your audience. But I don't think that's called dumbing down. Just please remove that word from your vocabulary when it comes to science communication or making an infographic. Yeah. Do you have any more questions? I'm happy to take them for a bit, and then I'll pass on the mic back to Shubhada. And
yeah, I don't think so. Is there any question? So thank you, Dr. Ipsa, for this very wonderful and very interesting and interactive session. And I'm sure students will be benefited with this. And now students must have any idea about what is infographics and what should be the process, and what is the idea behind it, and what they need to keep kept in their mind while making infographics. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we have another expert with us, Dr. Disha Chauhan. Welcome, Dr. Disha Chauhan. She's a neurobiologist and a visual storyteller, and currently she works at Outreach Consultant for Cite Communication Office, and now and also freelances as visual artist, illustrating pictures, books, comics, posters, infographics, illustrations for books and journal covers. She loves thinking and communicating science and images. We welcome you, Dr. Disha. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shubda. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you so much, IPSA, also for communicating what infographic is. And yeah, first of all, I would like to know that do the students want like 5 minutes break or something? Or should I continue? Like it has been a long session for them, I guess.
I think you can continue because the students are continuously asking questions. They are very actively involved in the sessions.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So please go ahead.
Okay, so I will share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, so I think overall IPSA has given a very nice and beautiful description about what infographic is and what different forms of infographic, what one should do and do not while making an infographic. So I'll try to keep it light and let's see how we proceed. So this is a kind of like in current time, a lot of things are going out as meme, which all students might be knowing about. So this was one meme which was very popular this year. About what infographic is. So as you can see here, that they explain that there is data, and then you sort the data and then arrange, and then when the same data is presented visually in a nice format, it's infographic. So basically, this data can be, like IPSA has also explained, it doesn't have to be always number, but it can always also be text or in other formats as well. Moving on. Yeah. So before I start this, I would just like to ask students, have they heard about covered art of Rajasthan? If anyone has heard about the covered art, I know that students are from different parts of the country, but if anyone is from Rajasthan area or have been to that area, might have heard about the covered art, or maybe Patchitra or some other forms. Or even if you have visited like different temples in around the country. Anyone? Yeah, so basically, that's great.
Yes, they are asking. Yes, they are answering. Yeah.
I will just write the name. This is that. So what cover art used to have is that this is like a box of wood made inside, like most people might be aware about the Russian dolls. So it's similar, but not exactly same. It's a wooden box, and inside the box, you can open the whole box into a big, paper form. And the whole box is painted, and the box is painted with different stories. And this used to be, this stories used to be way of taking forward the information of the past generations of a particular clan or a region into different areas of Rajasthan and narrating it to other people. So basically, when we say about infographic, that it is data which is presented visually in a nice format, that's the most simplest definition for the infographic. But what exactly you are doing is the basic storytelling that has been existing throughout the history from the time the humans are existing. So apart from this cover art, Patchitra and other art forms, folk art forms especially, which have been existing in India, is also a form of storytelling, visual storytelling. And why the focus has been so much all the time on the visual storytelling is because we all perceive visual information much faster, and we retain it also much more than other kind of sources of information. Like if I just give you a novel or a book with a lot of facts and data, It's not that you will not be retaining that information also, but it will definitely take much more time. And also it might take much more effort than if it's an illustrated book, or if it's a pictorial book, or if it's having at least some illustrations in between. At least that will simplify some things. So this storytelling has always been there. And now the modern storytelling, you can say, and it's not always a story. The story is also sometimes can be fictional. But here there is no fiction when we are talking about infographics. So that is the basic difference between infographic and the normal visual storytelling that we generally have around us. So this was one thing that I wanted to let you know when we talk about infographic, that it is not something new, but it has always been existing. Apart from that, can anyone answer that why do we need infographics, or where do we need this infographics? Anyone? So Manish has replied, to create awareness and make people familiar with our topic. Someone named AG has shared that to spread awareness. Samiksha says, because to understand things easily with the help of graphics, or for understanding the topics. That's accurate description for that. Salish says, infographics help to summarize big information in crisp form. Okay, so I understand that now most of you have the basic idea what exactly is a requirement for this infographic. But can you please also suggest where do we need this? Like what are the places where you have seen infographic around you? So Abhyan says books. Yes, that is one place. Manish says medical. Hospitals, yes. So basically all around you. Yes, Samiksha is suggesting news. So all these are right answers. And so you all are aware that what exactly infographics are, but might not have made it, or might have made it without being aware that you are creating an infographic. So this is something which is always around you. And usually infographics are used in the business purposes where people want to create more impact about their product using the existing data. Apart from that, in creating awareness, especially in research, we need to convey our ideas and our findings of our research through different methods, and infographic is one of them. Apart from that, as you all said, that airports, hospitals, books, all these places will always have some or other kind of infographics. And maybe you might have wondered that what makes this infographic different from each other. So we will focus on this type, we'll focus about this question also, that what are the different types of infographics. But before that, whenever you are making an infographic, there are three important things that you should always keep in focus. First is purpose, as you can see on the screen. Second is your audience. Third is the scope. So when we say purpose, so apart from awareness is the general term when it comes to the purpose, but it can be of different type. Like for example, in airport, you might be seeing an infographic that might be telling you, that might be informing you that how should you proceed in the queue, and how should you get your boarding pass or other things. So that is one kind of information that they want to convey to the travelers there. But it might not be similar when you are in hospital. In hospital, if there is an infographic, the purpose might be how you can get an appointment with a doctor, or get to a particular ward, or maybe it might be just that if you are visiting an ICU, how you can keep your hands clean and wash them, or avoid any kind of taking any kind of infection and other stuff. So these are the different purposes of infographics, and this is one thing that we have to keep in mind when we are talking about the infographics. or when we are making an infographic. Second thing is audience. When we say, I know that IPSA has more or less covered all these points. I'll just touch them a bit and then move on to next topic. So when we talk about audience, since you all are school students, maybe if you are making an infographic, your audience might be your own batchmates, your own classmates, or it can be that you are making a general infographic, like your whole class is working towards making, towards bringing an awareness about certain topic. So your audience is not your classmates, neither your batchmate, but you are bringing that awareness to a nearby community or nearby society. So it's always important that you should know who your audience is, so that you have this defined, as I said, purpose is important. So the purpose is also depending on the audience. So that kind of, like if you want to convey an information about your exam schedule, for example, that information, that purpose is not relevant to other audience outside your school, but it might be relevant to parents community whose kids are studying in your school. So that is how you define your different audiences. And then the scope. Why we need to understand the scope is, since you are making, for instance, you are making an awareness campaign, an infographic for an awareness campaign, how to save water. This is some general things that people usually in school make for. You might be aware of it. So this scope can be, since you all are already aware that you should save water, your audience is not your batchmates, not your classmates, neither your teachers. So who is your audience? You are going to spread this awareness to people around you, the society you live in, people you meet, your relatives, your families, and your other friends who are outside the school. So that is your audience. Your purpose is to spread awareness about how to save water. Now coming to scope, the scope of this is that you have to, so for example, since they all are not aware of the notice board of your school, they do not have access to the notice board of your school. So you made a very nice infographic on a big chart and you pasted on the notice board. But the people, the audience to whom you want to bring this awareness, they do not have access to your notice board. So that doesn't make your infographic effective enough, because the scope was to reach them. So in that case, what you will do, it will be better to design a smaller infographic of, for example, A4 size, and print it and then distribute it to your audience, or maybe paste it in different societies. So that is one example of the scope. Moving on. Now I'm coming back to types of infographic. So far we have been talking about what infographics should include, what it should not include, and what it is. But now let's try to understand what are the different types of infographic. Since we discussed that where are the places where we need these infographics mostly. So depending on those areas where we are going to need this infographic, our type of infographic changes. Also, like in different scenarios, you will be using this different infographic. We will see where. Let me just check the chat. Okay, somebody has said ads also where we can use. Yes, that's very accurate. Most of the infographics works as ads also. Okay, so you can see basically infographics can be very broadly can be divided into 9 types. But also apart from these 9 types, you will always see this infographic types will be overlapping. I will explain when I'll show example how they can overlap. Apart from this, all these types of infographics, they can be made interactive. So when I say interactive infographic, when I was explaining the example of scope, I explained that you can print it and share it. But what if you decide that you don't want to print it and save paper also? and you publish that on your school website, which is available digitally to all the parents, and you can share it digitally on all the other social media platforms also. So that way you are making the scope different. And now, since you decide that since it's going digital, you want it to be more interactive also, then instead of just having a plain picture or a photograph or illustrations with information or with data, you made an animation. It's not just a plain poster kind of infographic. In that case, it can be interactive. Apart from that, this infographic can also be used to collect data through survey. You already have some data and now you want more data. In that case, when you are sending these infographics, it might be having some columns where people can reply or people can choose options. This is the different kind of infographic which is interactive. So all the forms of infographic can be made interactive. I will explain when we move along to different types about that also. Someone has asked, can I share example for resume infographic? I will be sharing example of all of them. We'll move on with that. Before moving on to the types of infographic, can you all see this image? And just let me know what you understand when you view this, when you see this image. So 2 of you have replied that you see evolution of wheel, how the tires evolved, types of wheels, progress, evolution of tire or time. Exactly. So this is a rough indication of how wheels evolved throughout the time. Apart from that, like there is no text here, nothing, I haven't even labeled or given a figure legend here, nothing, no title or anything. But still you got the gist of this whole image. So that is what infographics are. It has some information in the form of data, which can be number, which can be text, which can be picture. And sometimes it might not be having any text at all, like this example. And still you will understand what the gist of that infographic is. So coming back now to the timeline infographic. So the timeline infographic is more or less can be divided into different types as well, but I'll just stick to the general definition of what timeline infographic is. For example, when you are showcasing or displaying a lifetime or a lifeline of some person, some celebrity. For example, here I have, this is one of the timeline infographic that I made earlier. This is an infographic for Alfred Russel Wallace, who was an evolutionary biologist, very famous as much as Darwin. So, but he was lesser known in earlier time, but now people are recognizing his work. So you can see here, it shows his life or how his life progressed, and he started, I hope you all can see the text part also. So in timeline infographic, one important factor is the timeline. As you can see here, it shows all the years and then what happened between during that time period. And also, I'll show another example and then I'll ask this question to you better. So you can see the medium used here is watercolor illustration. So when we say about infographic, the medium is not important. Whether you are using just a simple sketch or a digital illustration or icons or maybe some symbolic representations or maybe photograph or maybe some pie chart or graphs or different kind of versions of the graphical representations. So that is not mandatory for all kinds of infographic. But what is most important, as IPSA has also explained, is the concept that you are putting out, on the information that you are putting out, and how it reaches to your audience. And it should reach without any bias and without any manipulation from your own side. So this is the life of Alfred Wallace, and you can see he was born in Welsh border, and then he started working as surveyor, started making maps. So this is one style of timeline infographic where I have shown each timeline which I'm suggesting here on opposite side of the single timeline in the middle, as you can see the footsteps here. So these footsteps indicate his progress through his life, and on either side of it, you see the different moment of his life and different, actually not just any moment, but important milestones of his life, what he was doing. Like when he started working as a surveyor, and then he started working as an amateur botanist, and then later he started collecting insects and birds as a specimen while he was voyaging through Amazon, like that. And when he wrote books, and finally his autobiography in the end, which was My Life. Ma'am, please in Hindi language. I'm really sorry, because I think there are students from different parts and everyone might not be understanding Hindi. So I'll stick to English. But if you have any questions which you are not able to understand, please just ask here. Okay, so this was one example of timeline infographic. When I'm sharing this example, one important aspect is this is just an example. You do not have to follow this style. You do not have to follow this particular way of representing your information or your data. It is just one method of doing it, which has been followed by many people. So it can be done, but you can always be creative about it. You can always put better way of representing, and that's how the infographics has evolved so far. So this is another timeline infographic. When I was saying that in timeline infographic, one important aspect is where we show the time. That is, if it's a whole lifetime of some person, we will be showing it through years. But sometimes when you are showing a particular event, or for example, an invention of something, for example, how this wheels were invented, how this wheels evolved, most of the time you might not be aware of what particular timeline time the things were happening. You just have time range or period, and sometimes you don't have that also. So in that case, you skip that part, but it's still timeline infographic because you are showing a progression through a long time period. So then it will still be timeline infographic. For example, this timeline infographic suggests about genetics and how different progresses happened in the field of study of genetics. And if you can follow through this DNA strand, instead of those footsteps which I was showing in the earlier timeline infographic, this follows a DNA strand. So there is always one basic line which is suggesting the progression. And you have the eyes of the viewer or whoever is your audience will be following those midline, or will be following that that prompt line. So you are giving your audience a prompt line. So this was one example of timeline. Okay, now coming to the second type of infographic. So this were just two examples of timeline. Apart from this, there can be different examples of timeline infographic. My focus was mostly on scientific infographic, so I have chosen those kinds of samples. But for example, there is a company who is making tires. So, and they want to make a timeline infographic of how their tires have evolved from different years timeline, and also how advanced their technology has become. Excuse me, sorry. How advanced their technology has become through these years. So in that case, it might not be this kind of creative work, but a different style totally different style of designing, where they will just have a single line and they will be showing different years and when they launched a new style of tire and why it was better than the earlier one. So this is how the different timeline infographic can happen. But we will be focusing more on scientific infographic or something related to different streams of science. So this is process of infographic. Can anyone, I think anyone can tell because it's labeled. So, but you all might be aware of the water cycle and you might have studied that in your science book. So most of the time when you would have seen those infographic in your science book, the water cycle must have been in much simpler form. And here they have enhanced the whole experience of viewing that particular water cycle by using different kinds of graphics. So the basic concept remains same as it is in your science book. In your science book, it might be more like a line drawing showing water, showing mountains and other things. But the concept that the water is getting evaporated and then condensed and going to clouds and then coming back to the surface through rain, that remains same. So this is how you will address different audiences. For example, if you are addressing a class 4th or 5th student of your own school, and you have to simplify what you are studying to them. So you might not be suggesting them with the same jargons that you use or that you are seeing in your books, but you will be simplifying it much much so that they can understand it, or because they can understand the concept that you are also studying, but the words might be difficult for them. So that's how we define that what kind of infographic and what kind of text we are going to put in our infographic by the audience that we have to address. So I think you all have seen the line drawing of water cycle. So when I show you this infographic, which is a bit more complex in terms of designing, not in terms of concept, the concept is same. So you can easily understand that what concept is happening here, what process is happening here. So this is one type of process infographic. Apart from that, when I was showing different types of infographic, I suggested there is one type which is map or geographic infographic. So this one is not exactly map infographic, but this does show geographic region where this process is happening. So this is the overlap of different types of infographic. You can see here that it's showing that what kind of landscape it is happening. There is some mountain regions and there is water body near to it, and the water is evaporating from that water body and going back to the land surface, and from there it's coming back again to the water body. So this is how different types of infographic can overlap. So basically this type is not something which has to be taken very strictly. These are not rules. These are just to categorize the type of infographic to make your life simpler. For example, somebody is asking you to make an infographic. You just have to, they have just given you data and you are thinking that how you can make those infographic easier to explain, and you put the category in mind when you are defining the purpose for it. So when you know the purpose, you can easily define that whether it's timeline, whether it's process infographic, or whether it's map infographic or some other type. So this is just to simplify that. It doesn't mean that the map infographic or geographic infographic cannot come with the process infographic. It will always happen. You will always see a part of one type of infographic overlapping with the other. Okay, somebody has asked what is the meaning of timeline infographic. So any infographic that is showing a timeline, a particular time period of a particular event or a particular happening, then it's timeline infographic where you are showing a timeline. Okay, so moving on to next informational infographic. The last process infographic and this informational infographic and other infographics that I'll be showing to you are not from me, but from different infographic artists throughout the world. And I have taken these from them to show you what different styles of illustrations and or photograph or different kinds of graphical representations can be used in infographic. So what we have seen in the process photo infographic, the kind of graphical representation that we used in process infographic, you can use the same kind of graphical representation in timeline also. There is no restriction or rule that you cannot use that. So it's just an example to understand what these different types. So here there is informational infographic. So you all are aware that Corona is all around us now. And you can see here Corona important information about the COVID-19 new strain and the possible origin, what are the symptoms, and how you can stay safe, all in one infographic. Yeah, I also remember that a lot of you were asking well earlier the questions that what can be the size of your infographic. So this is one example where you are seeing so far all the infographics that I have shared are of different size. So this totally depends on where your infographic is going to be put. For example, if it's going to be put in a book, it will have to take that size. You have to consider that size. If you are going to put it in on a digital media, for example, a website, you will have to remember the dimension. You will have to stick to that dimension. And if you are going to put it on newspaper, it can be very long because newspaper is quite long, and you have the space for that. So different type of infographic will have different dimensions depending on the medium where you are going to show your infographic. So Manish is asking, what are the tools used to create infographics and what are the tools you use to create infographics? Okay, I'll come about answering this question in the end, if that's okay. Okay, so this is informational infographic. So what is informational infographic? When you are sharing a lot of information in a lucid manner through your graphical representation to make it easier to grasp. When I say easier to grasp, and as Ipsa also mentioned, that your audience is always intelligent. They know a lot of things. But what is problem here? Not everyone is having time all the time. Like you want to convey, since we are taking here example of COVID. COVID is something which needs our attention, everyone's attention actually. And to bring it to attention of everyone, especially to the people who are always in hustle, who are always running, people who are moving in the metro, who are traveling through locals, who are traveling through buses, what you can do, you can put this kind of infographics on these public places. So at least when they are waiting for the next metro, when they are waiting for their next bus, they can see this kind of infographics and they learn something which we need to convey to all the people, which is necessary precautions to stay safe during current time. So this is one kind of informational infographic, and you can see here there is information. Also, another reason that why we need to convey this kind of information. We could have just restricted to how to stay safe or to the symptoms. But apart from that, we have also shared that whether where did it originated and how did it originated. Why we are sharing this information? Because that is also part of the awareness, so that people know that kind of information and not gain information from the wrong places, the biased information. This kind of informational infographic is usually put on the newspaper or by government on different public areas. And most of the time, the data has to be right or accurate so that people do not get misleaded or misguided or distracted from the wrong information. Always, whenever something like COVID is happening, or maybe other diseases which are not as extensive as COVID, but still there will always be sources of information which will be spreading kind of misinformation. And to curb those kind of misinformation, this kind of informational infographic is released by government and other bodies of organization to make people aware, to make the general public aware. Also, in the earlier, so far we have seen, this is the third infographic. So in the first, you saw the graphical representation was using mix of watercolor and digital organization. Second was 3D graphical representation. And here you can see a comic kind of graphical representation. So that's what I was saying, that whenever we make infographic and when you break the word graphic, this graphical representation can be of different forms. We will be seeing more different forms ahead. Yeah. So here we come to map and geographic infographic. So when I was saying that those process infographic example that we were seeing of water cycle system, there we also saw geographic infographic because it was also giving geographic information of that particular process. But here you can see this is the wildlife map of India by a very famous cartoonist person from India only, named Rohan Chakravarti. He works extensively on creating this kind of infographic for raising awareness about the wildlife biodiversity and different kind of conservation efforts that are going to towards this wildlife of India. So you can see along the whole map of India, he is showing different types of tiger reserves and national parks which are existing in different regions of India. So it's very clear through just seeing this map where there are tiger reserves, where which animal is more prominent, where the what kind of wildlife is existing in which part of which region of India. So this is a very simple example of map infographic in a very beautiful representation as well. So it doesn't have to be the information that you are going to put to your audience doesn't have to be boring. And most of the time you will be noticing that I am putting a lot of emphasis on the word graphic. Why we need infographic? It's not just to bring awareness to the people. As I said, people are always in hurry. People are always in hustle. And most of the time, people will not pay attention or read the details, read the text, especially when they are not aware that that is something concerning to their life. For example, climate change, as IPSA has taken that example a lot of time, that is something which needs our immediate attention, and yet people are not paying attention to it. Because if you give them a book that, okay, this is the book, and this suggests why we should be concerned about this climate change. But if you give them a simple infographic, which shows them immediate effect, that this is what is happening if we are not going to do something about the climate change, maybe most of the people, or even if 50% of the people will go through that infographic, which will take their 5 minutes or 10 minutes max, they will have some change of mind. So this is why infographic is so important, because not everyone has time to go to the all sessions or conferences that is happening all around the world about climate change. Same way, if I tell you that, okay, this is the list of the wildlife map of India, that these are all the tiger reserves and national parks across India. And you can see this particular organism, particular animal here. You can see this monkey in Assam and it is endangered. You might not be paying attention to it, or maybe you will get bored even if you are interested in it. But if I show you this map, this is just one page, but it's showing you all the kinds of wildlife that is existing in different parts of India. And whenever you need to refer to this again, for example, you are writing a report, and the report is not exactly about the wildlife, but you need the reference also. So this is a quick reference also. So that is how infographic plays so many roles, and not just a simple awareness when we say. Apart from this, this example of map geographic or geographic infographic, let me give you another example of map infographic. So what happens, for example, you might have seen in the newspaper many times in map of India or map of world, and it is showing that it is showing a gradient of color. Maybe some places is too red, and some places it's a bit orangish, and some places it's yellow. what this map is indicating is actually the number of cases of COVID. I'm coming back to COVID and again, because this is something which is very relevant to the current time and which you might have observed very often in current time. So you are seeing a map. Let's stick to the map of India only. You are seeing a map of India, and you see that some states are having dark red, and some states are having yellow, and other states are in between the gradient of these two colors. So this is one way of putting information out. And then you will see a scale on the side where it will be showing that the dark red is the highest number, and then yellow is the least numbers, is the lesser population. So this is the statistics. If I tell you that, for example, in Delhi, there are 10,000 people who are infected with COVID. And in Goa, there are 2,000 people infected with COVID. This is just an imaginary number. So like this, if I give you information, the data, numerical data about all the states of India, you might not remember, or you might not be able to understand the impact it is having. The difference, you might not have time to understand the impact, more or less. So what will happen when you see this color map, the color gradient map, you are having a very quick view there, that you can easily see that Delhi is so red. That means it is having much more number of COVID patients than Goa. So that makes it very clear that, and you don't need to remember the number, you don't need to refer to the number or data, but you can easily compare also in the same map that, okay, Delhi is red, Goa is yellow, and maybe some other state is orange. So it is, maybe your state is orange. So it is somewhere between Delhi and Goa, and the other states surrounding you are of other color gradients, but the color gradient is of same color hue. So this is one way of map infographic. Just to go to chat. I'm really sorry. I don't know why someone.
Yeah, Disha, please ignore. We're trying to figure out
Okay.
how to.
Please go ahead.
Please continue. Yeah.
Okay. So that was one example of map infographic. Now moving on to other types of. So these are just two examples of map infographic, but there can be different creative way of representing your data into a particular geographic region or map. Now somebody was asking me about the resume infographic. So when I say resume or CV or any data like that or any document like that, what comes to your mind is the boring textual document. But here I'm representing two resume which are of very different style, but they're also kind of infographic. When I say infographic, there is an information about you, about your credentials, about your academic qualifications and other skill sets that you have. So that is an information. And if you represent that instead of just plain textual format, in a graphical format, which might be making it much easier for the viewer's eyes, that becomes resume infographic. You can see here two examples. And also when I'm showing you this, let me make it very clear that it doesn't have to always be like this. Especially, as I say, infographic has to be according to your audience. So if you are applying to a government agency, for an example, which is a very important place, and you need to send your resume there, so you cannot experiment there. But if you are just putting out, for example, if I'm a graphical designer and I want to convey to my clients that what kind of work or what kind of skills I have. So the first resume you can see, that kind of resume I will make so they understand what kind of different skill sets I have and different proficiency that I have in that particular skill set. So that is one kind of resume. And the second one, there you can see the graphical representation, or the graphical part is much less, and yet it's a resume infographic. and it can be used as much more elegant form where it's required. You cannot always use the first example of resume, and these are just two examples. There are even more vibrant kind of resume infographic, but that has to be based on the kind of job you are applying. That has to be based on the kind of position, the kind of organization that you're applying. So at the end, your audience really matters. Apart from that, you can also see, we will come to that later, about the fonts. When I'm showing you these infographic, please pay attention to three things: the type of fonts, the size of fonts, and the colors that are being used. So these are all infographics that use different kinds of fonts. They are using different kinds of colors also, but it has to change from time to time, and none of them are the perfect example. This is just to show you what different kinds of infographics are existing. Okay, now coming to list infographic. So you all must be aware of the Nat Geo channels and different kinds of magazines that Nat Geo launches. And apart from that, different kinds of magazines or different kinds of websites, that health websites especially, that suggest that you should eat this so that you will not have this kind of vitamin deficiency, or you should do, for example, the middle infographic, which suggests that these are the symptoms of the COVID-19. So you are constantly seeing this kind of infographic, but when you see, you do not categorize it that this is list infographic. But as I said, this categorizing will help you when you are deciding the purpose, your audience, and your scope of infographic. So you can see here that the first one is a very cartoonish style of infographic. And this is a good way to convey this to an audience which is actually of much younger age, like for school students, for example, like you. And if I want to convey that, okay, you should include this kind of food in your diet, but why? You are curious mind. If I'm going to tell you something that do this, you will not just accept that. You want to know why. So this is a simple infographic that suggests that what pepper has, what it offers to you, what pumpkin has, and what kind of vitamins it offers to you. So now I have given you this data. I have shared you this information, and now it's up to you that what you want to eat out of it. For example, you don't like pumpkin, but you like pepper, and you are having vitamin B1 deficiency. So you can always switch to something which you like. So that is how this infographic helps. And now, like I said earlier, pay attention to the font and colors here. This is one of the most colorful infographic that we have seen so far, and also very cartoonish, and the font is also very stylish, which will not be the case in all the infographics that we are seeing so far. So this is for the audience that is of much younger age, and they get attracted to much bright colors, much colorful appearances, and so thus we have kept it so colorful, and the font is also, and still it's legible. You can still, the readability is not reduced. Even though we have used stylish font here, the readability is still same, is good enough. So that is what matters when you are making infographic for a particular audience. It should appeal to that particular audience, particular age group, or particular demographic. Now coming back to the second one, the COVID-19 symptoms list. Okay, let me ask you one question. Apart from very few infographics or very few comics, you might have noticed that all the COVID infographics or different COVID posters or anything that you might have came across, they all have COVID virus, the coronavirus, in red color. Do you think it's just a coincidence that everyone is using it in red color, or do you think there is some significance to that red color, that why everyone is using red color? I would like to hear from you. Please share. Anyone?
Someone is asking about resume infographic.
Okay, I'll just check. Okay, yeah, danger. Someone has replied, red can be seen as a sign of danger. Red signifies the danger. An alert sign is also shown by red. Okay, so most of you have got that answer very accurate. That red signifies danger. And when the first time the coronavirus was identified and scientists found its structure, they worked with some science illustrator and they designed this illustration of coronavirus, and they made it red so that because coronavirus was a threat that was happening to the whole mankind, and in the beginning it was very difficult to make people aware about its impact, that how much it's going to change our life. Now of course we all understand that how it has changed our life, but in the beginning it wasn't the case. So they use this red color to signify that how dangerous it. Like when you see something in red, first thing it does, not always danger, but first thing it does is it grabs your attention very quickly. And then second thing can be danger, that yeah, this coronavirus is something that we should be afraid of, or we should be like aware of, at least if not afraid, we should be concerned about. So that's why this red color. And also I have shown another informational graphic about the coronavirus, which didn't use red color. So you may ask this question, that why we have used red here and why we haven't used red there. So with time, we all became much aware about the concerns of coronavirus. And also there, the focus was not about explaining how much threat it is, but explaining that what are the symptoms and what we can do to avoid it. So that is more of about information, and this is more like a kind of warning, gentle warning, that what all are the symptoms for this COVID-19. So that's how the different use of colors. Also, sometimes it's based on the designers that they prefer different colors. As you can see, they have used in the earlier one only two colors, black and yellow, and shades of that only. Okay, so someone was asking about resume infographic. So resume, should I go back to that or just continue with that?
You can continue with that.
Okay. So here, last one in the list infographic, the last example, as you can see, this is from Nat Geo magazine. You can see there are different kinds of, there is one organism and we are showing different types of it. So this is kind of list. And this list, the audience for this list is mostly people who are interested in this kind of wildlife or in this particular animal. And they want to understand the species, and the different types of them existing in this wild scenario. So these have a very specific audience and not everyone would be interested in it. So you can see the graphical representation here is very detailed and very scientifically accurate, very close to it actually. Even if not exactly a photograph, this is an illustration actually, this is not a photograph. So these are very accurate illustrations, and more or less it is for the people who are involved in the conservation of this type of animals or the researchers who are working on this type of animals. So it's the audience for this infographic is that kind of specific category. Also, you can see the text here is very specific. It's not much, the name and then the scientific name for that particular animal. So this scientific name is also like, you don't see here when I'm writing pumpkin, I'm not writing the scientific name for pepper or pumpkin here, because that is not my purpose here. I don't want to educate anyone about the scientific name of pumpkin or avocado or anything. But here the vitamins are having also the simple general terms which are being used in the public, not the detailed name for that particular vitamins. Same way here, they are having the scientific name because that kind of audience is being addressed here. So you can see the three examples of list infographic, compare them and understand that how the kind of information, even the minor textual information that you are putting out on your infographic changes depending on your audience. Okay, here is another example of list infographic. So this is very, sorry. Okay, so this is one very cool list infographic that came from NASA. You can see how it's just in one simple infographic. They have included all the steps like science, exploration, and technology, all the different categories of their organization towards one particular mission. And the graphical representation is also beautiful, and yet you have all the general information that one might require from this list infographic, the list of all the missions that they have during this for this particular project. This is one type of list infographic. Okay, now coming to this data visualization or statistical infographic. As I said, that all infographics will always be having some overlaps. So when we come to when we talk about data visualization, so data visualization always happens with statistical study of the particular data. So the data that you have can be in number. Since here I'm showing the examples of COVID and two different visualization formats, both are about COVID, you can see the difference. One is showing all the accurate numberings cases about the cases, and one is showing for a particular country only, not for a much broader area. And the number of cases is in round figure. And also you can see a different timeline here, while here they are not showing the timelines. Again, here please see the difference in color usage. The first one is indicating only 3 colors. It's focusing with white, red, and black. While here they have tried to make it more colorful to see, just to show the different months, what is happening in different months. And they could have used here different gradients of the same color also. But since the contrast would have been much lesser if they would have used the same hue, so they have used different colors. So this is how this data visualization and statistical infographic works. Okay. Yeah, so talking about data visualization, this is one very important infographic that you will come across very often in most of the organization, whether you choose to remain in science or whether you go to business or some other, like even for ads. Most of the time you will see that, for example, the toothpaste ad. When you see a toothpaste ad, it's not exactly an infographic, but you are being given an information that out of 5 dentists, 4 recommend this particular toothpaste. So that is a very tiny data that you are being given. And so that there you don't need a proper graph or a pie chart or any other form of visualization of your data. And in statistical visualization is also not happening there because it's a very tiny data. But when you talk about like millions or billions, then it becomes very difficult to tell in the numbers. And we human minds cannot gather so much, cannot retain so much data at once when it is being given in this kind of huge numbers. So there comes this kind of statistical representation. And as Ipsa has already shown different kinds of statistical representation that can be done. One was which she worked in front, the pie chart. Other can be graph, or sometimes it can be just this, as I was saying, the map visualization, the map infographic that we talked about earlier. So here you see in this data visualization, they have used this map infographic also. It's a very tiny part, of the whole visualization, but it's still overlapping with the data visualization infographic as well. So this is one type of infographic. Now coming to another, which is comparison infographic. So this comparison infographic you would have often seen around you, especially in your textbook. You can see here, this is part of one article, and this infographic I did for an article which was talking about climate change and effect of different kind of factors, either abiotic factors or biotic factor. So it compares the climate change effect based on two different factors. Same way, you might have seen a lot of different infographics which suggest that what happens, for example, again, we will take example of COVID, what happens to the number of cases during summer and what happened, how much increase it happened, how much increase in the number of cases happened during winter. So when you put these kind of data together and compare the data or compare the different factors involved in it, like in summer, people were using more ACs. In winter, people are staying more inside. So these are different factors. And when you are comparing this in your infographic, it becomes a comparison infographic. This is just an example, but again, then there are other factors, there are other graphical representations also involved in any kind of infographic. Here you can see again, there is digital illustration involved here. We have used most of the icons and vector formats of graphical representation and not a photograph, neither a sketch or something. But that is not the restriction for any infographic. Now coming to hierarchical infographic. I'm sure most of you might be aware of this hierarchical infographic in your textbooks, in your science textbooks, and would have seen often this food chain pyramid. So this is one food chain pyramid showing the marine ecosystem, but different kind of food pyramid that you see in your textbooks are all form of hierarchical infographic. The infographic can have different studies involved. For example, if you are just studying the food chain ecosystem of a grassland, that also will be hierarchical because there will be one top predator and coming down to the primary producer. So this is one format of hierarchical infographic. And then when we talk about evolution, this is going to a bit more complex side of this hierarchical infographic. When we talk about the evolution of a particular organism, a particular animal in different time period era. So this is these are the two examples of hierarchical infographic. Now, I have been showing you, here another information to share is that you can see the first infographic is having just a graphical pictorial representation of those organisms, while in the second one we have actually used the photographs. So this is another, again, two examples of the same infographic using different forms of graphical representation. Now coming to this. Okay, so here is a question for you. Can you explain to me, this is from internet, the scientific method that is a general scientific method that is being used. Can you explain to me, can you categorize what type of infographic this is? So far we have learned all the different types of infographic. Can you categorize this? Anyone? Somebody is saying this is list infographic. Okay, let me give you a hint. It explains the method. So far we have understood about timeline infographic, process infographic, map and geographic infographic, and hierarchical infographic, resume infographic, and then two or three more types. Okay, so I'll proceed with the answer. I don't see answers from you. So this is process infographic, although someone suggested list infographic, which is also accurate because it suggests a list, but it is not a plain list. It is telling you step-by-step method. So it is still overlapping more with the process infographic. So it explains you the process, how scientific method is done. So if you are, for example, explaining your younger sibling how to make a chai, and you have to leave a paper with that with your sibling, and you are not going to be there at that time. So you just have to leave a piece of paper for them so that they can make a chai in your absence. So you made a infographic like this where you designed some bubbles and wrote the process to help them understand the process easily. That makes it process infographic. Excuse me. So that is what makes a process infographic very important in the scientific community, especially. Excuse me, just let me have a sip of water. So scientific method, why I'm saying that process infographic is one of the most commonly used infographic in scientific field is most of the time you will be explaining, you will be putting out your method of your experiment, the kind of experiments you do in your chemistry lab or in your biology lab, or also sometimes when you are writing your answers along essay type answers, you explain it in a flowchart manner. And that makes it that you explain the whole process of that particular experiment or that particular work. That makes all of them process infographic. So this is one example of process infographic, and why I particularly shared this one is you can see the graphical representation here is very simple. All you need is just few colored pens, a paper, and you can also make such kind of infographic. But what it does, the impact it has is much easier to understand. If I give you 2 paragraphs of this scientific method to read, it might still be it might still leave a room for confusion. It might still leave room for doubt. But here it makes it very clear that all you have to do is observation, and then you have to theorize your observation. You do your prediction, you make your prediction, you see your evidence-based prediction, you combine your theory and your evidence to your prediction. So that is how most of the methods go in the process infographic. Although you can always make it much more fancier than this, but this is a very basic format and still it's very functional. So in any kind of infographic designing, form always follows function. So when I say form follows function, that means whatever design you are doing, that is not what is most important. It is always good to make the design more catchy or to make it more attention grabbing. So it's not that it doesn't matter, but what matters more is your function. And your function is that whatever information that you have to convey to your particular audience, it should it should reach them. You should be able to convey it without any bias, without any misinformation, and without any confusion. So this is what process infographic is. Okay. Okay, this should be much easier. So this is part of one zine that I've made in collaboration with CCMB. It just explains something. Can you identify what kind of infographic this is now? Okay, so you'll have to raise hands if you want to ask questions. Or I think they can answer. Okay, so if you have answer, please raise your hand so that you can answer also. If you understand what kind of infographic this is. Again, this is a very simple graphical representation. Anyone? Okay. Yes, so Nilanjana has got it right. This is again process infographic. So as you can see, again, it's explaining a process of a method which was used in a lab. And anytime you explain any method, it doesn't have to be in the lab. But for example, the Maggie pouches, the Maggie you eat, it does have an information on the back, infographic kind of stuff on the backside, where they show how can you make that Maggie, or how you can prepare that Maggie. That small tiny part is also a process infographic. So from now onwards, whenever you see an infographic, try to mentally categorize that what kind of infographic it is. That will help you understand that what kind of audience or what kind of purpose they had when they were thinking of this infographic. Okay. Okay, now coming to, since I was all the time talking about the fonts, color, and different things, I want to show you an example. This is one text, and why I was putting so much emphasis on the fonts. This is one form of text. There is nothing wrong with this document. It has all the data that one needs. It's just a sample, like a brief history of lorem ipsum. What is lorem ipsum is kind of just the textual part. So what is lorem ipsum? It explains why do we use it, where does it come from. But there is still something wrong with this document. Not exactly wrong, but you can always make it more enhanced for the purpose. Let me show you how you can make it better. Now, do you see the difference between the first document? It's the same document. I have just worked with the font. Here, all the font are of same size without any emphasis on any. And here, I have just made this italics, and these are all in bold now, and it's the same font. So same way, when you are making an infographic, one important aspect of your infographic, especially when it has text, is how you play with your font. Whatever font you're using, even if you are doing it with hands on a pen, using a pen on paper, you know how to make your practical journals. You write your titles in much bigger font than the rest of the text. You highlight each step that this is the method, this is the material that is being used. So all that thing that you are learning in your journal or in your textbook or in your notebooks in the class, those same concepts are also applied in the infographic when you are making. When you are making an infographic, it is very important that what is the most important aspect, textual aspect of that infographic, that should go in the bold, that should be in the color, which should be much more highlighted than other. And when I say highlighting, it's very important that you understand that how it is going to be dispersed, how your infographic is going to be dispersed. If it is going to stay in digital format, you can play with the color, but also always remember while designing any infographic, less is more. Always less is more. And if you are going to use a lot of color, you are just going to distract your audience. They will get confused. For this, the best example was when I was sharing the different types of infographic. If you remember, I used different color for each type of infographic, which was not actually necessary. So that is an example of what using a lot of colors can do. It didn't made any impact. It didn't add it to that slide at all that I'm using different colors. Apart from the fact that different colors indicated different types, but it wasn't required actually. The different types, when later I'm already explaining it, it doesn't make much sense. So same way in any infographic, if you are going to use too many colors without any actual essence for it, it's not going to make a good impact on your infographic. While if you use different gradients, use gradients of the same color, as I explained, which can be done in map infographic or in other types of infographic as well, that will leave a much deeper impact to your audience. Apart from that, when you are making an infographic, one thing which you should always remember is, and you might be paying attention to that subconsciously also, that whatever data that you are going to put there, like Ipsa also explained, has to be unbiased. So data is neither wrong or right. It's just fact. It's just data. And your work in infographic is to represent it without your personal bias to it. Like if you are showing some data, two types of data which are in comparison, and if you are giving one green and one red, and the green is just because you like that kind of data or information that data is bringing out, and red for the data that the kind of information that data is bringing out you don't like, you are putting your bias there. So when you're using colors in your infographic, you have to be very careful that either use very neutral colors, and if you are using colors like red or green, it has to be it has to be required in the infographic. It has to have some significance for the particular information that you are putting out. Okay, so that was all from my side about the different types of infographics and what impact each type of infographics can have. And while we were understanding this kinds of types of infographics, I tried to also include that what you should do and what you should not do while making a good infographic. So apart from that, three important things which has to be considered while making infographic is that it should be accurate, it should be useful, and it should be meaningful. So I suppose that you all are aware of the Venn diagrams. So if you put three circles of this accurate, useful, and meaningful, and you understand that your infographic should have all these three aspects covered. If you are covering, for example, just that your infographic is accurate and useful, but it's not making any meaning to your audience, then it's still not complete. And if it's meaningful and useful, but it's not accurate, then it's misleading for your audience. You are spreading misinformation, which is not the purpose of any infographic. So this is three important aspects that please remember when you are making an infographic: the accuracy, the usefulness, and the meaningfulness for that. Yeah, so Shubda, that's where I finish my part for the infographic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Disha. Thank you for explaining all the types of infographics. And yes, I would say some of them were tricky ones. So thank you for explaining such a nice way. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. At the end, I would say to all the students, if you are creative and you have an interest in graphic designing, and also you want to address global challenges, then this is the right opportunity for you, all of you. And we are going to organize many competitions. You can join us, you can participate in this national level online competition, that is infographic competition. All the information and guidelines regarding the competitions will be given on Jigyasa website, that is www.jigyasa-csi.in. So you can go through it and you can register yourself there, and you can participate in this competition. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, Shubda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Disha. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. Thank you.
Thank you to all the kids also for attending and being so patient.
Yeah.
I would just like to share that I had some exercises for them to make the infographic, but I realized that there is already a competition for infographic making. So I'll just skip that part for today, and it's quite late also. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.